Wow. Welcome to Targeted, the show for masculinity and success. And I'm your host, Atlas Aultman, former military commander turned best-selling author, now bringing you a podcast that you can use for sharing stories from highly successful men so that you can figure it out for yourself. Welcome. This is Targeted. All right, welcome back to Targeted. Today is another epic episode. I can't wait to have this conversation. We've been talking about this for a long time. In the studio right now, I have Wyatt Shepherd. And I just want to read some things because I wrote some things down. And I don't want to miss anything, but I'm sure I'm going to because the man is amazing. He is a gym owner / partner. He's got a black belt in Judo. He's got a black belt in Jui Jitsu, a couple degrees. And he was a pro MMA fighter. And the man drops wisdom like every time I see him. So I can't wait to see what he's going to do with this studio session today. Wyatt, welcome.
Awesome.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So what do you do whenever someone says, what do you do? You know, how do you answer the question of who you are?
Usually it's kind of like I own a mixed martial arts gym, you know, and then of course the conversation will go from there. But, you know, it's, you know, then they'll kind of be like, well, you know, usually it's like, oh, karate or taekwondo. And it's like, no, it's, you know, like UFC where they're beating each other up in a cage, you know, kind of that. And I think that's the way it kind of sets us apart from different academies is we're not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu academy. You know, we have fighters that are doing kickboxing, boxing, Jiu-Jitsu, MMA, you know what I mean? So
yeah.
A lot of the time, you know, when people ask me, and it's, you know, it's not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu academy. We teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu there, but it's a mixed martial arts academy. We do everything. You know what I mean? We teach everything.
Yeah, you really do, man. I have learned a lot. And I've been doing this for a long time, but you're right. I got caught up in some Asian martial art gyms for a while, karate for a while, taekwondo for a while. And you're like, wow. When I went to your gym, I was like, you do everything. Like your schedule is packed. Yeah. How do you do that, man? How do you do that all the time? I always see you at the gym.
I mean, that's part of being a gym owner, right? You
yeah.
know, you gotta, you know, consistency is the key, as we always say, you know, and that's about anything, especially with coaching. You know, your students are going to look to you, you know, for leadership, you know, and you have to lead by example, you know, and if there's, you know, what I always try to do is if I'm willing to ask them to do something, I should be willing to do it myself. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I usually don't want to ask my students to do anything I'm not willing to do myself because I want them to see that I'm willing to do it as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, you know, that I think that's a big part of leadership there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When you're coaching, whenever you're teaching, how do you look at the students and say, man, that person's struggling? So I notice you're always Johnny on the spot whenever someone needs you. And I'm like, how does he do that?
I try, you know, you're looking around the room and you're trying to identify anybody that is having an issue with a certain technique or, you know, and sometimes you can just see maybe even a lack of confidence, you know, or something like that, you know. And so usually, you know, especially happens a little bit more with the kids, but the adults as well. You know what I mean? I'll take them aside after class sometimes and kind of give them a little pep talk like, hey, you know, be calm, you know, you can do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just calm down and, you know, whatever they need to hear at the moment. But it's that's just part of being a good coach, I think, you know, is looking around the room and seeing if somebody's struggling with something. And obviously if they are, you want to jump in there, you know, before they start to develop bad habits or something like that and try to fix it. You know what I mean?
We all have bad habits though, man. We all, I mean, I know. So the reason why I asked you that question is because, you know, you said you don't want anyone to do what you wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And I know you've been in the gym for how many years have you been practicing?
Gosh, it's been, I'm pretty sure like over 20 years now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Cause I first started, you know, very similar to other people. Me and my buddies, you know, we went to the, you know, back in the day when you could go rent movies, or if you can remember that, right? Back in the day, Blockbuster or whatever. And, you know, I'm from, I grew up in Payson, Arizona, which is a small town just north of here. But I remember walking in with one of my buddies, and of course, you know, we were, you know, teenagers at the time, you know, and looking, you know, so we were looking at the top shelf movies, you know, and you had like Faces of Death.
Yes.
And you had, obviously the, you know, some of the more adult movies, you know, but I remember looking up there the one day and there was UFC, Ultimate Fighting Championship, you know, and it was like, you know, this martial arts style versus that one. And I was just like, what is this?
Do you remember who's on the cover?
I'm pretty sure it was like Hoist Gracie and Chemo. I'm pretty sure that, you know, classics. And so, and I'm pretty sure we rented the second or the third one. We didn't even get the first one right off the bat, but I remember taking that home and watching it and just watching these guys go at it. And it was different. It was back then it was style versus style.
Yes.
And so we were finding out right away. That was the first time where we were answering the question of what style of martial arts really works. You know what I mean? You had masters of Taekwondo, karate, judo, jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, you had a sumo guy in there too.
Yeah, you had
Come on.
everything going on. And it was interesting to see right away that the guys that were winning these tournaments, had a grappling background, either jiu-jitsu or the wrestling, both of those styles were doing so much better, where you think, well, a guy's, knows all these kicks or punches. But the thing was, is as soon as the grappler could get a hold of him and close the distance before he could launch a kick or a punch and put him on his back.
Right.
He was in an area that he usually didn't practice in. And so, that he was just like a fish out of water there. And I remember watching those early ones and just thinking like, dang, man, I want to learn that, especially Hoist Gracie. He was beating up dudes, submitting them, choking them that were twice his size. You know what I mean? And I was just like, man, this is, I want to learn that.
How old were you?
I think probably like, around the 16-year-old.
16-year-old.
16, something
right around
like
the piss and vinegar stage. You're like, I want to fight something.
Yeah, it was cool.
Did you start like then?
So basically it was, that was the thing, is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at that time was very in its, infancy.
Yeah.
There was a lot, basically, I think it was Horian that moved over to California, and he kind of got in, with some people there, and he kind of got in with Hollywood is what it was, and he was the one that did a lot of the fight choreography for Lethal Weapon 1. Oh. So if you remember at the end of the movie,
I didn't know
Mel
that.
Gibson actually chokes Gary Busey out with a triangle choke. Yeah. Well, that's all Gracie Jiu-Jitsu right there. And so that's kind of how he kind of got his start, is he got in with those guys and kind of was like, hey, this is this Jiu-Jitsu thing, and he started actually doing movies and stuff like that. Well, he ended up meeting a guy named Art Davies who was pitching this idea for UFC. Yeah. And he was like, man, this is a great segue to show people Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I got this younger brother, Hoist. He's in great shape. He's young. He can beat people up. And we're going to bring him in here and show people what this is all about. And, man, talk about a great infomercial, basically, for what was to come,
Yeah. Art ran the show for a long time, too. Yeah, he was the guy.
Yeah.
So when people talk about MMA, a lot of names come out as like the founder of MMA.
Yeah.
What would you say? I mean, would you say Art was like one of the founders for American MMA?
He was. I mean, he had the idea of, his idea was even crazy. Like they were thinking about like having, this platform and like, freaking alligators around it, all kinds of. They had pitched all these crazy ideas, of different things that it could be, but. Obviously he was the first one to kind of have like this style versus style thing. And of course that was appealing to the Gracies, like, oh, great. We can, cause they'd already been having these challenge matches, so they'd have like Kung Fu masters come over and be like, let's see how good you really are. And they'd be just,
it's crazy.
These guys up,
So I've heard the story explained multiple times, but everyone has a different experience and how they got introduced to like all these styles could come together.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Like, it was blockbuster moment.
Yeah.
It was a blockbuster moment for you, but
yep.
Like, when did it actually start to become a practice for you?
Yeah. So basically, like I said, I basically kind of was introduced like a lot of people by seeing it. And then next thing I knew, I wanted to do it. Well, I was looking around for, anywhere that I could train, anybody that did something like that. And then, of course, from Payson, Arizona, there's nothing there. I think at the time, like the only people in Arizona was maybe Megaton. And then Gustavo Dantas, moved from Rio de Janeiro, and he was teaching out of Arizona Combat Sports in the beginning. And I ended up hearing about him later. But, that was kind of the segue into wanting to start to train. Yeah. And so I went to, I was just working out at the gym back in the day, and we had a place called Payson Athletic Club in Payson. Okay. So I was just working out, and they were having a demo, a martial arts demo in the aerobic room. And so I looked in there, and I was like, well, they're wearing white, the gis, and they were jumping through the air and doing arm bars on each other. And I'm like, this must be like what Hoist Gracie did, right?
Yeah.
So I walked in there, and I was like, hey, what do you guys do or whatever? And he was like, oh, it's a judo club, and they were doing judo. And so that was the closest thing I could find at the time that was comparable to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Yeah. And so I was like, well,
judo.
Yeah. The next day I walked into the club and never left. You know, I was just in the second I started doing martial arts, even judo, I was just hooked. You know, I'd been really athletic in school. I'd, you know, as an athlete, I played basketball. I've played almost every single sport, you know, as a kid.
Yeah.
I did track and field, stuff like that, you know, but, you know, it's your team versus their team.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And, you know, when I started to get into martial arts, that man versus man competition, that was the purest form of competition, you know, and I was very competitive.
Yeah.
But I was like, man, you know, and Joe Rogan had something he talked about, you know, before, and he was like, well, you know, in the end we could say, yeah, my team beat your team or whatever, but yeah, you might have beat me, but I could still kick your ass.
Yeah. For real.
So for me, that was always that was the big thing, right? Yeah, you know, sports or whatever, but the purest form is, can you kick my ass or can I kick your ass? You know what I mean? That was kind of the, you know, what could be more pure form of competition than that, you know what I mean? And so when I got into it, I was just loved that sense of, you know, competition. And, you know, and then as you watch the later UFCs, as they started to go on, you could start to see who was blending things together.
Yeah.
And how that was, you know, you were beating superior guys by blending some things together. And, you know, Don Fry, one of the first ones, I remember watching him when he first came in, and he had that boxing background, but he was a judo black belt too. Yeah. And so he could do things on the ground. He had the wrestling, he had the grappling, but he had the stand up, you know what I mean? Yeah. And he was, you know, I remember the first one he came in, he won it. And he was a lot to deal with because of how well-rounded he was. You know what I mean? So as the UFCs went on, you started to see guys like that coming in, and they weren't just one-trick ponies anymore. Yeah. And I think that's where the evolution really started, and that's where I wanted to start to get into fighting.
Man. All right, so there's a lot of questions I got for you now.
All right. Bring them on.
So speaking of Don Fry, you can check out the episode we have where we talked something similar. But Don Fry came to your gym.
Yes.
I mean, it's how was that? Was that like full circle? You're like, I used to watch this guy. Now he's coming and watching me. Yeah, this is crazy.
Well, totally cool. And there's even more history because you could ask Don, but my cousin Chad Griggs was one of his main training partners for a long time in Tucson. Yeah. Chad walked into Rincon Gym where all the old school guys like Don used to train. Steve Owens, obviously Don's, you know, judo coach. And gosh, I don't even know what that guy is, like 8th degree judo black belt now or something.
Angry Yoda.
Yeah. But, you know, he walked in there one day and, you know, got hooked just like I did. And he was, you know, we went over with Don to Japan and, you know, went, you know, over there when he was fighting and different stuff like that. So, and then Don also used to come in and train at Apex MMA in Tucson, where I used to train with, that's Joey Rivera's school down there in Tucson. And man, I remember that was a little bit more towards the end of his career. So they would bring him in, you know, by that time, you know, and he had like 3 guys that would literally stretch him out for like 30 minutes before he would start training. Yeah. And then once he started going, man, you didn't want to get in there and spar with that guy. He was, you know, so I've known him, you know, off and on for a lot of years, but it was super cool to, you know, to see him and have him come in again.
He fought until he was like 46, I think. Yeah, he fought forever.
He did.
That dude. Time. That dude took a beating for entertainment, man.
Oh, my gosh.
Great guy. Okay, so you specifically, you started judo. You started looking at mixed martial arts. I know from a young man's perspective, when I started martial arts and I walked in a room, I had this difference. I guess it's confidence or swagger. I just knew, like, oh, you know, I'm the only one that's doing combat sports in here, so I don't have to listen to you. I don't have to listen to you. I definitely don't have to listen to you. Like, how was it for you? Were you feeling that swagger, that confidence, or what drew you in to give you that? Like, I got to do this.
It was almost right away, just like you say. When I walked into the judo room and we, you know, started training, I remember it was maybe a week or even 2 weeks in. And I remember leaving that training session and I went to get, you know, I'm a huge fan of Asian food, by the way, so it fits in really good with martial arts. So I went to get some Asian food after. And I remember as I walked into the restaurant, you know, that I was walking differently. I had a confidence that I hadn't had before, which was interesting because I was never, I was always a fairly confident person because I was an athlete, you know what I mean? So it was, I didn't feel like but I had a newer, stronger sense of confidence than I had ever felt before, that I could take care of myself, that, not just that, but my family too, my friends and those people around me. And I really liked that feeling of that I could protect the ones around me that I love now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was only the beginning. I mean, I'd only been training for a week or two.
Right.
As I continued to train, that sense of security just got, greater and greater. And so, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of people, they think that, it's the see red example, right? Well, I see red, and then, dude, like, if you've never written a paragraph, you're not going to write a book.
Yeah.
And whenever someone cracks that book open and says, I'm a writer, it's a different thing that you're opening yourself to. That exposure, man. And kids get to do it now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I want to dive into that a little bit. So when you're teaching kids, you have a family, like, run... Like your whole family's involved in this. I see your sons. I see your wife.
Yeah.
I see your whole family's involved in this culture.
Yeah.
So it's super addicting. But like, from the kids' perspective, like, how do you see kids change? I know you do. I know you see it.
That's huge. I mean, I've been teaching kids for almost as long as I've been training. And that was the thing with me is, I wanted to get in and get my feet wet and try everything, but it was more to have the experience. I really wanted to be a coach. That was really where my passion was at. But, with kids, I mean, gosh, I've been teaching them so long.
When you wanted to be a coach, did you want to be a coach for adults or for kids?
Yeah, all of them.
You just wanted to be a coach.
All of them.
You love coaching.
Yeah, I loved coaching.
Man, I can see that now.
Adults, teenagers. It didn't really matter, what age, but
the kids.
Oh my gosh, I've seen martial arts change many kids' lives. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we're not just stopping at kids, but adults as well. We could go on and on and on. But when you do see that change, and that confidence instilled in a child, and just how it, it's not just in the training room, but it literally changes their lives. You know what I mean? And I talk about bully prevention and different things at the end of classes and different stuff that, like, hey, this move is for competition, but if you needed to use this move on the playground, I'll kind of go into that.
Stay safe.
Exactly. Just as a self-defense thing. And that's where I think a lot of schools start to go wrong too, is they're so into the competition scene, you know what I mean? That it's like some, and it tends to be more like Brazilian Jiu Jitsu academies more. Yeah. But they're training for competitions all the time, that everything is geared around tournament rules.
Yes.
Well, there isn't any rules out on the street.
Nope.
There is no rules in a street fight. You know what I mean? And so we can't forget that we're really teaching self-defense. That's what martial arts is. That's what it really means. You know what I mean? It's not, one of the great ways we can practice it without going to jail or getting arrested is by doing tournaments, or fights that are sanctioned and controlled by a sanctioning body, a referee, people out there that they're there to protect you as you practice your art.
Right.
But there's no one there to protect you in a street fight.
No.
You know what I mean? And so my main thing, and I know that my partners and owners as well, is that we're not just a gym that's geared towards competition, but we are teaching people life skills of how to save their lives or their loved ones. God forbid it ever happens, and hopefully it never does. And I tell a lot of people, I've been in very few fights outside of the gym since I've been training, because there's really no need to fight anymore, and I'll fight, but I need to get paid now. So I usually tell people I'm not going to fight unless I get paid anymore. So once you've been a pro fighter and you've been paid to fight, what's the point in doing it for free anymore? Unless you really had to. And what you find out is that you can solve pretty much all problems with your mind. Yeah. You know what I mean? And the majority of things can be extinguished that way. But if you can't, you always have this in your back pocket. You know what I mean? And, again, rather be
you're a humble man, and you won't say this, but I'm gonna read between the lines, and you can hit me later, because I know you usually do anyways, whenever we're sparring. That's another story. What you're not saying is there's a lot of people that are teaching martial arts as a sport instead of a way of life. And in reality, like when we have sparring days in the gym, And let's say, well, I'll pick on Joey. So Joey goes out and he's trying to get better every time. So Camel Toe Joe, you know, he's definitely in the martial arts way of life.
Absolutely.
And so when I'm rolling with him, I will stop him sometimes and be like, I'll stomp you in the nuts if this was a street fight, you know. I'll smack you in the ear right now. This is how I would fight.
Yeah.
But realize we're rolling, and he's like, yeah, okay, whatever, man. I'm gonna kick your ass, and he'll grab my arm, and it'll be done. But it's different whenever you're looking for a gym, like knowing all the things that you know now. What would you look for in a gym?
Something like that, where you've got a mix, you know what I mean? Because that's the thing, is you want to be able to practice and to do the martial art, you know, and competition's a great way to be able to extinguish that and to do that. But at the same time, you need to find a place that is teaching you really how to defend yourself.
Yeah.
If again, God forbid that happens, you know what I mean? And so, you know, that's the thing, is something that's a balance, you know, a balance of both of them. You know, the thing is I think some schools are worried about how many trophies they have up on the wall, how many medals have their students won. And that's all great.
Sure.
It shows what you've done in competition, but what could you do if your life was really on the line?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's what, you know, I think that's what we got to remember, you know, that's really what it's for. You know what I mean?
Well, so let's go into what it's for. Because a lot of people don't understand the threat that they're exposed to. They think it's a safe world out there.
Yeah.
And then they look at social media and you'll see somebody maybe do a rear naked choke because they got pulled over after a traffic violation.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of road rage out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of road rage.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of that on social media. You see a lot of it in Phoenix.
Yes.
People send me videos all the time like, what are you guys doing in Phoenix?
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm doing martial arts, baby.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're doing.
Right.
But like, I don't care how big you are. If you can't breathe, you're going down.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is the practical application of martial arts besides honing your body, controlling your thoughts? Because you walk with different confidence. You talk to people differently. That comes out, man.
Yeah.
Like the reason why you're not fighting is because someone looks in your eyes and they're like, this dude ain't playing.
Right. It's something, I mean, you know, I think that the biggest aspect of fighting in general is the mental part. That is the hardest part. You know, I already understood that to some extent being an athlete, you know, when the pressure's really, on, when the game is on the line, how are you going to react at that point? You know what I mean? And so I kind of had felt that, but never to the extent of, mano a mano. And that's what I loved about it, that rush, that exhilaration.
Yes.
But, you know, that's the thing, is it's going to be at another level, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when the push comes to shove, and you really have, I remember my first cage fight, for instance, walking out there, and your mind starts to be like, you don't have to do this.
Yeah, what am I doing here?
Fight. Yeah, you don't have to fight. You don't have, why are you doing this? It's you start to ask yourself these questions, but then you start to answer them. Well, I'm here to test myself. I'm here to see what I'm made of. And it's for a lot of guys, I would say, and for me specifically, it wasn't that I was fighting for anyone else. I was fighting for myself. I wanted to know what I had inside. I wanted to find out what I was made of. But I remember when they locked that door and there was only that guy, my opponent, and me, and a referee in there. And I remember them putting that little latch into the gate, like, this is it. And I remember, like, there ain't no backing out now.
Yeah.
Either I kick this guy's ass or he kicks mine. Which one's it going to be? And that's when you find out what you're made of. You know what I mean? Because it's a fight or flight at that point. You're going to have to get in there and you're going to have to do it, or you're not going to do it.
Yeah, let's dig into that. Let's dig into that right now.
Sure.
So fighting in the gym, one thing. Sparring in the gym, another thing. Sparring against somebody you don't know, another thing. Sparring in competition, another thing. But competing is a whole different level. So I always try to explain it. So the combat version of this is whenever you get put into ultimate stress levels, your body reacts in 3 different ways. I want to see if this is similar. And let's do so. Yeah. Whenever someone's shooting at you, everything slows down and you feel like you can't move fast enough. That's one common response. The other one is tunnel vision. Nothing else matters around except for what's in front of me. And the third thing is you pee your pants, man. Like that's a natural response. I've never seen a fighter pee their pants,
Yeah.
but I wonder if the other two are similar. Like when they latched that gate, you said you felt different. How'd you feel different?
They're absolutely similar. I remember, and not even just being the MMA fight, right? That's a whole nother level, but doing my first jiu-jitsu competition. And I remember when I got out there, all I could see was a tunnel, and I could just see the guy that I was going to be grappling against. You know what I mean? And so very similar, where things slow down like that, you know what I mean? And it's just kind of like, sometimes even after, it just seems like it was just a blur, like what happened in there? And you remember little pieces of it, or, different things like that. But that's the part that, that makes or breaks you. And that's the mental part, you know what I mean? And a lot of people win or they lose before they ever get into the cage. You know what I mean?
In their mind.
Exactly. You know what I mean? And it's all up here. I could have trained every physical attribute that I have.
Yeah.
And I could be completely ready physically.
Yeah.
But if I fail mentally, it's basically like I'm nothing. You know what I mean?
Let's go there. Let's go in there.
Yep.
So Henry Ford says, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Yep.
Have you heard a coach of yours say something similar?
Absolutely. And I've told my students the same thing, especially the kids, because I call it the filthy 4-letter word. Can't. That's the bad word we can't say at the gym, right? For the kids, obviously. But why didn't you do this or that with that move? Oh, well, I can't do that. No, so I'll pull them aside right away. Like, you can do it. Yeah. Don't say you can't, because if you say you can't, you won't be able to do it.
Yeah.
My big analogy is, one that we can go back to our childhood is the engine, the little engine that could.
Yeah.
I think I can, right?
Thomas the Train too.
Exactly. So I try to tell the kids that one more, because it makes a little more sense to them, that if you tell yourself you can't do something, you won't be able to do it. But if you can tell yourself you can, you will be able to accomplish anything that you put your mind to. You know what I mean? And so, another thing we're trying to instill in kids from an early age is that they can. You can do it. You know what I mean? There's too many people and, too many different, sources out there telling us that we can't do things. You know what I mean? And so, but the mental side of fighting and competing and, period, is huge. And that's the thing I think about competition is such a big deal, is it's the only way without, again, getting arrested or having to go to jail, that I can go in there and fight and get some of that adrenaline dump, that feeling of what it is really like to fight. Because here's the thing, if I'm out there on the street and I really do have to throw down, and I have never felt what the adrenaline spike feels like, I have never felt that feeling of what it is to really be in a fight, it's going to shock the crap out of me. You know what I mean? And so you get to feel some of that when you get into competition, you know what I mean? And so for me, if you really did have to, get into a scuffle out there, what that feels like now. You're used to that feeling. And so I think that that's huge. If you really are going to be, so what is part of self-defense? Competing, you know what I mean? But remember, competition is in a controlled environment with the rule set. There is no rules out there. So it's even another level. But if you felt at least this level, it's better than never feeling it at all. You know what I mean? So I think that's a big part of, what competition's so great for, is kind of giving you a taste of what that, that adrenaline feels like.
I have to go into, from there, I have to go into You're Always On. And like I said before, earlier in the show, I always see you at the gym. I know you have thank you for spending time with me today. I know it's your day off.
Yeah, no worries.
How do you stay on all the time and maintain, you have a family, man. Like, how do you do that?
It's just, it's like anybody else. I'm not perfect, and I'll have where I feel moments where I'm, better or not, as good, but I am my own toughest critic, I'm sure, you know what I mean? But I know that so many people are looking at me and up to me, you know what I mean? And it's...
What do you mean by looking at you?
I mean that, I'm an example, you know what I mean? And I've put myself in a position where, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And I like it because it's good, because it keeps me in check too. You know what I mean?
Do you feel Do you feel like you check yourself more because of that pressure?
I would think so. There's a lot of things, sometimes you'll think about, well, what if I did this or what if I do that in life, and then I'll second guess it and be like, well, what would all the students think if they seen me do that? Or if I, do this or that, you know what I mean? And so it's definitely, you're thinking about who's watching you, who's looking up to you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I hope that they understand, that I'm a natural man. I make mistakes, things like that. But I do try to walk a higher level, especially for them. You know what I mean? Because I know that they are looking at me for that, for strength and for that example sometimes, you know what I mean? But it's wonderful also to have students and to have friends that, when you're not feeling quite as strong, that are there for you too. And I've definitely felt that as well.
Yeah. So I need a little bit more on this because people I know a lot of people don't understand what you just said. So I'm going to dig just a little bit deeper.
Sure.
So community pressure doesn't fill the tank.
Yeah.
That's an internal fire that you have burning inside of you to be the example. That's part of martial arts is the mental aspect of it.
Sure.
But do you have exercises that you do? Are there things do you listen to music? Do you breathe? Do you do cold plunges? Or do you do sauna sessions? Yeah. How do you refill your tank?
Yeah, definitely. A little bit of all of those things, definitely different things that will push you. You know what I mean? My thing is if something starts to kind of scare me, I want to meet it head on.
All right.
So
now, when did that start? Because we're not born with that.
Gosh, again, just more kind of even around the time when I started martial arts, because again, it was something that was like, wow, but just an example, as I get older and, for whatever reason, heights bug me more. And so when that started to happen, it was like, okay, I'm going to go skydiving. Ooh. Or I'm going to jump off the stratosphere in Las Vegas, or I'm going to, do something to face that fear.
You did all that.
Yes. And it doesn't mean that, you're not scared, but you get up there and you meet it head on, you know what I mean? And that's the thing that I think a lot of people what is the easier route to not do something that you're scared of? You know what I mean? And so for me, how do you grow? By facing your fears, by stepping outside of your comfort zone. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's the only way to grow, And so again, should I tell my students to step outside of their comfort zone or meet their fears head on if I'm not willing to? I can't do it. I can't live with that if I'm not willing to do it. And so that's what I'm trying to say is, I know I have to be the example. I have to walk the walk if I'm going to talk the talk. You know what I mean? So. Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, we're talking family, we're talking life, and in my personal life, whenever I put my kids in martial arts, the woman in my life told me that was the best thing I ever did for the kids. Oh, so, and it changed them mentally. The whole life changes whenever you decide to go live in an uncomfortable situation. Oh, yeah. Martial arts will put you in that continuous. Yep. But let me ask you this: have you been uncomfortable outside of the gym as a man? Where you had to make a hard decision or something bad has happened and you had to use all of the things that you're prepared for in a personal life?
Many times. I'm going to give a small example and then I'll give a bigger one.
Okay.
Here's a small one. The Pepper Sauce Caves. They're kind of down by the Tucson area.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever been...
spelunking or whatever they call it.
Spelunking or caving before. But I remember one of the first times I went through the cave system down there, and there was one particular area where it was super tight. And for me to get through it, being a bigger guy, I literally had to, suck it in a little bit, like, what I mean? And I remember thinking, dude, if I get like halfway through this thing and, am I going to get stuck?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that was one of those times I really had to pull on that martial arts training, man. Yeah. I had to calm my mind down and be comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. You know what I mean?
Well, how did you do that, though? Because I'm telling you, man, I am claustrophobic.
Yes.
They put me in a little tube to, do a brain scan of me one time, and then I got stuck. And then I'm like, crap, I'm going to die in here. And then I had to calm myself down. Yes. How do you do it? How did you do it?
It's similar. And my wife, she laughs because I am actually severely claustrophobic.
Me too.
Okay. So sometimes we'll be, and everyone always laughs, because, like, sometimes me and my wife grapple in bed. But literally she's a black belt too. So we literally are grappling. Okay. So,
sure.
but sometimes she'll throw the blanket over my head, or she'll sit, like throw the pillow or something and get on top of me. And that will freak me out, man. And she'll crack up and just be like, you're such a tough guy, but as soon as you get a little claustrophobic, you're flipping out. And my students usually don't see that, you know what I mean? But it's the same thing as, I think, like having a 300-pound guy on you. You have to learn how to be comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. And the cave was a great example of that.
How did you do it?
It was basically like I just had to, put myself in that zen.
You close your eyes?
Yeah, yep. Kind of close your eyes, control your breathing, start to
focus on your breathing
down. I'm an ex-firefighter too, so there's when you have your mask on, if you're in a fire, similar things. If you're starting to run out of air, you have to start doing what we call skip breathing. You know what I mean? And so you're bringing as your breath comes down, your heart rate comes down. And so basically kind of like that, kind of almost like a meditational state, you know what I mean? And I was able to calm myself down to the point where I was like, okay, I can get through this. You know what I mean? And slip through, and everything was fine. And it was literally a couple of seconds.
It doesn't matter.
But man, it'll freak you out, right?
It does, man.
So it's just like, dang, man. And so I would say that's a small example of when you can use that that type of training. But
it's different when someone else chokes you out.
Yeah.
When you choke yourself out, it's so much worse.
Right.
2 seconds is a lifetime.
Very true. Very true. Feels like hours, right? So
yeah.
But more recently, my daughter had some health issues, my middle daughter.
You're a father of how many kids?
So I have three. I have three kids, 2 daughters, 1 son.
Okay.
So my oldest daughter is Hannah, Krista, and then Dustin.
Okay.
And so that's the order. So this was my middle daughter.
Dude, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to say, man, I've seen a lot of dads, and I've seen a lot of dads that are proud of their kids. And I've never seen the level that you and your wife, you guys are always so proud of your kids, and they're such good kids, man.
Oh, thank you.
I think you posted recently your son got his driver's license.
Yep.
And I was like, I'm not surprised at all. And you're like, oh, watch out. I'm like, nah, man, that kid's gonna be good on the road. Yeah. But as a father, you're doing it right, man. So I want to give you that props right now. But I'm sorry.
No.
Go back into your story.
I appreciate you, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I like to think of us as a close family unit, you know what I mean? And that we do have that, not that other people don't, but we feel like we have a pretty strong bond. Yeah. But anyway, she was having some health issues a couple of years ago, and for whatever reason, we still really don't know exactly why, but her kidneys were failing.
They're failing?
Yeah, and so she was basically in stage 5 kidney failure.
I had no idea, man.
Yeah, and so we were kind of like, man, obviously this is new to us, and you always see people, that have a child that has a health issue, whether they have cancer or whatever else, and so. But this was a hard one, it was kind of like, okay. And so watching her go through it, watching her suffer through it, you know what I mean? And, and so we're like, okay, well, so we tried many things, tried to figure out what was going on. And it basically kind of came down to that for whatever reason, her little kidneys were all shrunk up and just full of scar tissue, and they just weren't working. And so
how did they find out?
Yeah. So basically she finally started to have some flank pain, what they call like pain kind of in the back, right? Kind of where the kidneys are at. And I think she was just at work one day, and it just got so bad finally that she just called my wife and was like, I'm taking myself to the hospital. Like, I don't feel right. My wife had an appendicitis before. Yeah. And so we were thinking, well, maybe that's what it was, because she had a lot of the same symptoms. And so she went to the hospital, and they checked her, checked her out.
Yeah.
Checked the appendix, and they're like, your appendix is okay, but your kidneys are not working. They're like, everything's way down, and as far as numbers go, her GFR and her, different things there. And so then we're like, what the heck's going on? And so anyways, that's kind of how it all started, how we found out, and what's crazy about your kidneys is you don't feel any type of physical, issues with them until you're almost like all the way till they're almost not functioning.
Wow.
Yeah. So you could be kind of like already having kidney issues and still not know because you feel fine.
Yeah.
It takes them almost all the way down to where they're not working at all to finally feel it physically. And so that's where she was at, unfortunately. And so after many different things, we tried stem cell, we tried a lot of different other experimental things to try to, you know, combat the situation and see if we could get them to fire up or come back at all.
Yeah.
But it was kind of thinking like the damage had already been done, unfortunately. And so it kind of just got to that point where, you know, she was going to have a kidney transplant is basically what it was going to happen.
Wow.
And so
how old?
So she's 21 now,
Yeah.
but at the time, you know, we're talking 19. So she's just a brand new
Just
adult.
starting.
Yeah. Just a brand new adult. And, so here we are, you know, it's going to have a kidney transplant. Well, you know, if you go on the list for donors, you know, you're looking at 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
And so, you know, by that time, you know, is she going to be on dialysis? You know, what is her state of health going to be as we wait and wait and wait?
Yeah.
And so, of course, you know, we're like, well, what's the next step is, you know, seeing if we can find a match throughout the family. You know what I mean? And so a few of us went ahead and started testing, including myself, and it ended up coming up that myself and my oldest daughter were really good matches. And so, of course, you know, my thought process is, well, hey, I'm older, I'm in my 40s now. Yeah. You know, I want my other daughter, you know, she can, you know, live her life, get married, have kids, you know, do all of these things, and then maybe later on down the road she could be another option.
Yeah.
Let me go first.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And so,
how did you process all that? I mean, that's a lot of thought.
It's
head of house.
Yeah.
You're thinking about everyone in the family there. You just described a process that seemed really quick.
Yeah.
Like, but you thought about it for a very long time, I can tell.
Yeah. So basically first you go undergo all this testing to see, you know, and so finally they called me up and they're like, hey, good news, you know, you're a really great match and whatnot. And, you know, so obviously in my mind, you know, we're going to wait until she's got real health issues or is on dialysis or something by that time. If we wait to just see if something comes up on, you know, within the donors and, you know, or you can step in and do it, you know? So then I started to research, obviously, you know, how, you know, what is the risk, you know, how do people function after? And to tell you the truth, it's actually, you know, there's a lot of people out there that are born with only one kidney. And they never even know.
They don't know.
And they'll go in for some other type of a health issue and they'll do a scan. They're like, hey, did you actually know that you've only got one kidney? And they'll be like, I never knew. They never even had a clue.
Wow.
So you can live with one kidney very easily. And a lot of people do. And people that have become donors. So what happens, obviously, you have two kidneys, they take one out and the body will sense that one's missing and the other one will take up the load and it'll actually grow by 20%.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it'll actually enlarge itself and kind of take over the load. So apparently that's what mine has done because I did have you know, we went ahead and went through and had the transplant and everything. But man, talk about, you know, it's just one of those things, you know. I mean, everybody is dealing with something, you know what I mean? And you just don't know. And in my situation could have been so much worse. You know, you could have a kid that has, you know, is terminally ill with cancer or something. And I see these poor people going through that, you know, and thank goodness my trial was just, you know, this for now, you know, it could change or whatever, but you know, that you have a child that is going through a health issue like that. And it's always hard to see somebody that you love, especially your daughter, dealing with this and being poked and prodded on and put, you know, IVs here and tests done there. And, you know, and it's still an ongoing process, you know what I mean? But, you know, yeah, not easy to deal with.
So a lot of people, whenever they're going through that process, they hit bad habits, man.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things you can do in that situation that aren't so good and to distract yourself or delay the inevitable.
Yeah.
This whole process, how long did that take for you to like get okay, you got checked and you got verified, right? Because you have to, they don't just, the one's good. You probably got verified. And then the whole process of watching your daughter be in pain and you're like, I got to do this now. I mean, Man, how long was this? How long did that take? What was the timeline?
It was basically like a year and a half.
Wow.
Almost, or like at least it was a little over a year from what I remember, because, like I said, we tried some other things, and then finally it was like, but like you said, there's a fear there that, you could obviously go under, to have the surgery done and never wake up, or, there's risks there. And so obviously for my wife, she's like, could I lose my husband and my daughter on the same day?
I mean,
they're both going in at the same time, and so
how were your conversations with her?
Oh God, trust me, man. There was many nights where we,
sleepless nights.
Yes. Where you're just like, and don't get me wrong, man, there was fear, I was scared, obviously in some ways, but obviously the chance to be able to save my daughter's life or have her, a better way of life. That's what a dad is supposed to do.
Did the doctors give you the scare tactic that they normally do? Like, here's the bad things that could happen. Did they give that to you?
Absolutely. But at the same time, if you research it, there is a lot of, the percentages of it being successful are actually pretty dang high. There's many people that have been kidney donors, and they just live on to have regular lives and just completely almost forgot that they don't have another kidney. You know what I mean?
It's got to make you feel a little bit better.
For sure.
That
was probably the one thing that kind of gave me at least, some type of relief is that, statistically, this is a pretty high rate of success, right? For both parties, and obviously, and so definitely there was some worry, throughout the whole family of how well is this going to work, but I will tell you what, man, I had some students as well that were huge, strengths at that time. And like you said, there's some, you could do some things, some bad habits or whatever. Yeah. I'll tell you what, man, it was actually the people around me that got me through it. You know what I mean?
I love that.
So, I think that's what we got to remember is that sometimes we're a source of strength for other people, but then that becomes full circle and they can be a source of strength for you. You know what I mean? And I definitely, sometimes you think, it's like one of those things, I don't want somebody to have to come over and help me.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it's a blessing for someone else to help somebody else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you got to remember that sometimes it's okay to take the help. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, but it's hard sometimes.
It is, especially when you're more of an alpha male like I am, you know what I mean? Where I'm strong enough, I can do it, whatever. But when I started to kind of like, hey man, I appreciate you reaching out to me and saying that boosted my spirits today. It was huge,
That's so good, man.
Yeah.
So I see that's a common theme I get from a lot of successful men is that their network, the community that they chose to put in their life is huge. But I want to talk about one specific person, probably the most important person that a man could choose to have in their life. I want to talk about your wife.
For sure.
Like, how did you meet your wife?
So we're kind of like the typical high school sweethearts, type thing.
How long have you been married?
So this June will be 26 years.
26 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Typical high school sweethearts, 26 years.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So you met her and how did that work? I mean, let's talk about the story.
Sure.
I want to know.
So basically, the way that I met her is living in Payson, Arizona. She down the street there were some neighbor kids, and she was one of the friends with one of the daughters, and I was friends with one of the sons.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, that was kind of how I met her, as she was a friend of one of the neighbor kids that lived close, and she obviously she'll hear this, but she'll agree that she had the crush on me first. So she had the hots for me.
Yeah.
It's kind of how it started out. And I was kind of like, but she was kind of the school athlete too. She was in she played a lot of different sports, and she was one of those girls that could kind of like, she was coming up, she would beat up the boys sometimes too. So she was kind of like a tomboy. And so, I always respected her as an athlete and different things because, she was always at the top. She made the varsity softball team as a freshman, and she was on the varsity volleyball team too, and all of those things, But, and so it was kind of it's a funny story because I was going out with another girl, and and I got to the point. Well, what happened actually is I got in trouble, and so I was grounded for a month.
How did you get in trouble?
Well, let's just say that it.
Oh, you're being very. Just spit it out, man. It was a long time ago.
I was experimenting with some herbal remedies in high school, and my mom and dad found out, right? And so, anyway, there's our politically correct term. But anyways, and so I got in trouble, and I was grounded for a month, and there was some other things too, but. So anyways, I was sitting there and finally, basically the time was up. I wasn't grounded anymore. So I was like, sweet. So I literally called everybody I knew, my friends, everybody. And then even my own girlfriend could not go out to do anything. So I'm like, what the heck? And so just a little bit before that, I had been talking with Angie, more. We had gone on it was like a church outing down the Salt River.
Yeah.
And so just having
Angie's
conversation.
his wife, everyone.
Yeah, yes, that's my wife, Angie. And so we were just kind of having more of a friendly conversation.
Yeah.
And then it came up that she was liked White Zombie, and so if anybody knows me, I'm a huge metalhead. Yeah. I love music and I love rock and roll, especially heavy metal. And so anyways, I was like, you like White Zombie? Because a lot of girls don't like the harder stuff, and I was like, wow, that's cool. And then she's like, yeah, I like, my mom listens to Metallica. We like Metallica. And so of course that got us going right away that, okay, yeah. And so anyways, no one could do anything that night that I was, finally ungrounded. And so I was like, you know what? Well, there was that one, Angie, she's kind of cool, like, maybe she'll want to go hang out, and it was literally just more of as a friends thing. I wasn't thinking anything other than that. And so we went ahead and started kind of hanging out at that time, and it was just a friend thing. Just
being friends.
For me, for her, it might've been a little bit more, but it finally got to the point where my girlfriend I was with could never go out and do anything. And so I was hanging out with Angie more than I was with my actual girlfriend. Yeah. And so one night we were over at her house watching a movie or something. And when we finally were like, hey, have a good night, or we were leaving, for whatever reason, I just kind of pulled her and kissed her on the cheek.
Smooth.
And so anyway, that was kind of the way it started. And let's just say it wasn't too long after that, I broke up with my girlfriend. I was like, hey, you're old news. You can't ever go do anything. You're boring, and started hanging out with Angie more. And we still weren't going out at that time. We were just hanging out more. And then of course, it eventually blossomed into a relationship. And, so I think that's what was really cool and has been a bond for us, is we were friends first. Yeah. And then we were best friends, and we are still best friends. I would say, who's your best friend, that's, number one, obviously it's my wife, and then it'll go in order after that. Obviously I have, male friends that are my, consider best friends as well. Yeah. Yeah. But,
I think it's different though.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Cause you have a special and unique relationship with somebody that you've had for a majority of your life now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And choosing that person, you chose her.
Yeah.
You chose her to be in your life for a reason. Yeah. And now you guys help each other get through it. Yeah. That's different than any dude that's going to come into your life, man.
It's very true.
It's what it is.
Very true.
So whenever you have something that awesome, not too many guys have that.
It's very true. I consider myself super lucky, super blessed, and we do have an amazing relationship. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So on the show, I either have divorced people.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just didn't work.
Yep. Sure.
And it just wouldn't. Or I have people like you, and they're like, I've been doing my life with this person, and we get it.
Yep.
As a younger man, what would you give me as advice to look for whenever I'm looking for someone like you have?
You got to learn to give and take. You have to, I think at this time, now it's pick your battles. You know what I mean? Don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
You're going to have times where you disagree, or that you
always,
don't see eye to eye. And it's, is it, how big of a deal is it really in the long run? You know what I mean? And we obviously, when we were first married, silly ass things like her putting the toilet paper on wrong, or, squeezing the toothpaste the wrong way, or whatever, different things that would annoy you when, as you're first settling into living with somebody like that, but all of that stuff doesn't mean crap anymore. You know what I mean? It's just like, it is what it is. And so it's the big stuff now, you know what I mean? But you got to learn to, be a little less selfish, you know what I mean? Yeah. Think of, others, you know what I mean, besides yourself all the time. And, you know, it's not always an easy thing to do, you know what I mean? But at the same time, give and take, you know what I mean? You got to learn to give and take. And, you know, I think that that's kind of what has helped us throughout the years. And, you know, and the hard things that you go through, man, if they don't break you, then they make you, you know what I mean? That's huge. And so we've gone through some huge trials together,
right?
You know, and they could have broken us, but we stuck through it, and we only came out the other end stronger than we ever could have been.
You just did it. You just opened up that box of worms. You said you had problems. Everyone has problems, but you said you have problems that could have broke you.
Yeah.
Give me one of those problems, and then how you guys went through this situation.
Well, great example is what we were already talking about.
Okay.
The health issues with my daughter. You know, that was a very trying time. Like I said, we were, you know, there's a lot of, you know, unknowns, you know what I mean? How am I going to turn out after this? You know, and I know for her, it was like, you know, so my wife, she's got some, autoimmune issues. So she's got a gluten allergy. She can't eat gluten. And so they kind of ruled her out as a possibility for a kidney you know, as a prospective, you know, donor right away. They were kind of like, nope, you're out, you know. So she's kind of like, well, that, you know.
And she probably felt stressed about that.
You know, so
like I can't, but she wanted to.
Yep, exactly, correct. And so I was the one that could do it, but she knew she was going to have to be kind of the one that was going to keep us strong, you know, and that was the thing is, you know, my worry is I'm going to have a recovery process here. I'm going to be down and out for an extended period of time.
Yeah. She's
going to have to take care of things, but you know, how am I going to come out of the surgery? How is my daughter going to come out of the surgery? You know, I know that those were all things that she was thinking of, but that was one of those things, man, that, you know, there was a ton of stress, you know, there was a lot going on at the time. And, you know, and it's something that absolutely could have driven us into the ground. She owned her restaurant at the time. She's since sold it, but at that time she was extremely busy with the restaurant. Yeah. You know, we had so many things going on in life at that time that, you know, I know for her, it was just like, you know, a lot, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that was definitely one of those times where, you know, it could have broken us, you know. But here we are, we're on the other end of it. And, you know, at this point, I feel, closer to her than I've ever felt now. You know?
Yeah, I mean, those hard parts of life, if you get through them.
Yeah.
That's why combat relationships are so strong.
Yeah.
Like, I had somebody in the studio, one of the guys that I was in combat with 2 days ago. And there's a difference between me and him and me and somebody who I worked with. Because I went through some hard times with him.
Sure, absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Whenever you do that with your partner, I can definitely understand. So, how you do that with people depends on where they are in your life. Mm-hmm. So, did you guys talk a lot? Did you write notes? How did you like? Is there an affirmation?
Yeah.
Like, how did you guys get through that?
A lot of soul searching, like you said. A lot of conversations. A lot of late nights talking about it. It was interesting because we were actually in Maui in Hawaii when I found out, when I actually got the call back that, hey, you are a match.
Wow.
And
we
can go ahead and set this thing up, you know, and
that's a crazy place to be.
And it was a great place to be because we were like in paradise with whales jumping out of the water and rainbows everywhere. And I guess it was a great place to find that out. You know, if there could have been a better place, I don't know. But at the same time, it was that realization that I'm going to go under the knife, you know, and I've had surgeries, right? I'm a martial artist. I'm an athlete. I have, you know, my neck is fused from C4 through 6 with titanium, and I've got titanium in my hand, and I've had my nose broken several times and re-broken. So, you know, different things like that. So don't get me wrong. I've been through my fair share of surgeries, but this was the first surgery that I was going to go into where I didn't have something wrong with me.
Yeah.
I was doing this for somebody else. So it was one of those, different. Like, I'm going under the knife, but nothing to fix me. It's to fix my daughter. So it was uncharted territory for me. It was different than anything I'd ever dealt with, you know? And so, you know, that was the, you know, obviously the hard part, the trying part, you know?
Yeah. I mean, so like when you're taxing your relationship like this, the way I hear you say it is you're worried about you and your daughter getting back to being in the family, and your wife is worried about you both, but differently.
Yep.
And so whenever you have those internal feelings and you're trying to process that's sleepless nights. I get that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But have you ever heard of love languages? You know what those are?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know your love language and your wife's love language?
It's probably martial arts, or it's probably music. Those are things that we
It's
both,
air.
yeah. And that's one of the things that we kind of, I think that's why we're close, is we had so much in common.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we still do. We still do. That's what's so, I probably have more in common with my wife than I do some of my best male friends.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely our love language is choking each other, or
That's called quality time.
Yeah, exactly right. Or
that's
going
a Chapman.
to, we love going to concerts. We
Yeah,
go to
I saw
concerts
that.
a lot,
Did you guys
stuff
go to
like
more
that.
concerts then?
Yeah, I think we always have, but
Yeah.
it's something that, I guess for me, it's one of those things where you can kind of just like, maybe like going to see a movie, you can kind of leave the world behind for a minute and check out and go somewhere else where you don't have to think about those things for a little while, and I think that that's kind of what, going to shows or concerts does for me, you know what I mean?
For sure.
But, we got a lot of things in common like that, but that's definitely something that definitely got us through that, and coming out of it now, on this end, stronger than we've ever been for sure.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Oh, you guys are or she was in a restaurant business.
Yes.
That's a tough business, man.
Definitely very stressful.
Would you advocate for anyone going in the restaurant business now knowing what you...
Probably not. No. I mean, it's one of those things, everything ended up great. They ended up selling it. I think it's been a little over a year now that they ended up selling it. And I was glad to see that happen, though, because I think it's the restaurant business is great if you're a younger person. As you start to get older, it can tax on you a lot more. You know what I mean? And so I think that people that have been in the restaurant business, a lot of their life, it'll take some age off of you. It'll take some time off of you a little bit because of the stress.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Taking some life off of you.
Yeah.
I've known a couple of people in the restaurant business. One of my friends has been opening up bars around the world, and he interviewed people that do that, like in the service industry.
Yeah.
And he gave me the test, and he goes, "You have no business in this world." And I'm like, "You're absolutely right." So there's like 5 pillars. I'll put the link to that book if somebody's looking at doing that.
Yeah.
But you're still in the service industry in martial arts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's making sure that people become a better version of themselves, whether you're in a restaurant or you're teaching them life lessons and things that'll help them. It's different in a restaurant business, way different. The temporary exposure to people who are real is just, it's night and day. I'll digress.
For sure.
Stay with us as we stay on target with another awesome episode coming up next. We'll see you there. And subscribe to Targeted Now. As an ambassador to buckedup.com, I get to give you our special discount. That's Atlas25 when you go to buckedup.com to get that special discount. Only for our listeners, Atlas25. Go to buckedup.com now.